Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno, and on today's episode, we have former NBA veteran Pete Chilcutt on the show. Pete attended North Carolina, where he played for the legendary coach Dean Smith before playing 9 years in the NBA, best known for his time with Akeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets. So without further ado, please welcome Pete Chilcutt. I wanted to get started with you tonight, Pete, and kind of go back to your childhood. And you grew up in Alabama, correct?
I was raised in Alabama from about the fifth grade through high school, but I was born in South Carolina. I lived in Florida and Georgia as well.
Okay. So
Yeah.
when you're younger, when did you start falling in love with the game of basketball?
It was really early. Probably, my earliest memory, my parents were separated. So my earliest memory were going back to my dad's house in South Carolina every summer. And I did that throughout high school and spending the summer there. And we just played basketball nonstop. I have an older brother who's about 2 years older than myself. He was about 6'4" now. My dad was 6'5", so he was an athletic guy. So we'd go to YMCA and just play hoops nonstop all summer.
Did you have any favorite team or player growing up?
Well, I was pretty non-committal to teams until my first memory, which was kind of, goes back to the time frame, was when games started being put on TV a lot on ESPN, being brand new. This is in Alabama. They started showing North Carolina, and you can imagine that was the Jordan time. So my high school career kind of was right in his prime, and they had the games on ESPN. So I grew up with him being my first college player I like. Now I did also like Magic Johnson. My brother liked Larry Bird. We used to have the rivalry with that one, but college was Jordan for sure.
It's interesting that you ended up going to Carolina, of course, and that was those Carolina, Pete. I mean, still nowadays, but especially back in the 80s and 90s, was just loaded with talent. I mean, there was every team, it seemed like, had at least two or three guys who made it to the NBA. So from the Jordan era all the way through the mid to late 90s, it was just, I mean, Rasheed and Vince and your guys with Rick and all those guys and Hubert, and I mean, I think was a Clifford Rozier on that team that you had just loaded. So James Worthy, of course. It was unbelievable the amount of talent that you guys had.
It was one of those things, as I said, when you watch them on TV, I mean, those teams with the Perkins and Worthy and Jordan going through the championship run, it was a dream school, and I had no inclination that I would ever go to school there. But I say, hey, that's my dream school, and I was in the parking lot pretending like I was Michael Jordan. And so, like you said, for it actually to come true and to be at the same school with the same great coach as those great players, it was. If you knew me, if kids like this all the time, if you know kids that have those dreams, like it never comes true. But for myself, when I got that call in my before my senior year from Coach Guthridge, he's like, we like you and offer a scholarship. I mean, that was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is really happening. So as you said, those great players almost made it seem like it was impossible dream at first, but then as I developed in high school and went to some of those camps, it was a dream come true for sure.
Pete, when did you know, in high school, for example, when did you start thinking to yourself, I could play major college basketball?
It's almost alien today because kids grow up today and their parents know, and they know they're going to be in the league at age like 7. I grew up just loving the game, and I had a dream, but I really didn't even think going to college was going to be something I could do to play basketball. I think my first camp I went to was maybe my sophomore year, and I got some it was a Davidson was interested, and then I think I went to a South Carolina camp in my dad with the Gamecocks. They were a little bit interested, but nothing. It all really happened from my sophomore year to in 2 short years. I went from being this guy who liked basketball, who was kind of tall, who could kind of shoot it, to being a top prospect and getting. I really at the end could have gone anywhere I wanted, and it's just amazing how that happened to somebody who wasn't expecting it, and it almost carries over to the next step. Didn't have an inkling that I'd be able to play in the NBA as well, and that just happened as well. Late in my college career, I kind of thought this could really happen too. So like all this stuff where these kids come in and they know they have this chance and then they have the skill set to do this. I kind of was just like along for the ride and like enjoying it. And all of a sudden these good things started happening.
Dean Smith, let's go to Dean, because I mean, he's such a legend. How did he, the first time you met him, what was that like? And what was his conversation with you as far as trying to recruit you to North Carolina?
Well, I was a very shy kid growing up. And my family was very well, very proper. I had to wear slippers in the house. I had to carry handkerchiefs. So just very respectful. So I had this great respect, and I was very in awe of what he had accomplished. And my parents grew up in that area, so they kind of knew what a great coach he was. But words can't describe the impact he had, by coming to recruit me, and the talks he had. And it was just like unbelievable. I mean, you can't even really put it into words how it made you feel that this great coach, you coached Jordan and Worthy and winning championship, was now coming to Utah, Alabama, to sit in your living room to tell you he wanted you to come to his school. It's like, it just didn't compute. And again, it's almost like you look back on it, and I see, I can see that it happened, but like, it just didn't feel real at the time. As far as what really happened was a great thing for me. But at that time, I was just like, just unbelievable. It was something that you can't really put into words, but just imagine your greatest dream coming true, right? It just doesn't happen, right? And it happens. That was awesome.
Well, I mean, playing for North Carolina, knowing that you had the spotlight on you, of course, and you had in those years it was 87 to 91, I believe you played there.
Right.
The talent we already mentioned, and of course, I think later on you had like George Lynch and Eric Montrose, and those guys came. So, and they ended up winning a championship in '93 in the infamous, C Webb game. But those 4 years you were there, what did you learn at North Carolina that prepared you for the NBA? And give us a couple of your favorite memories playing with all those guys like Hubert Davis and Rick Fox.
Well, first of all, I did go there in '86, and I redshirted that year. So when I redshirted, it was with Kenny Smith and Joe Wolf and Dave Popson and Curtis Hunter, and I, to be honest, that was the best team that I was on at that team for those 5 years. And they didn't win it that year; they lost to Syracuse. But I went in there with Joe Wolf and Dave Popson being established, and then having J.R. Reed and Scott Williams being my incoming class. And Coach Smith would say, hey Pete, it's gonna be tough to find you minutes. Now, if you want to go for it, I'll be happy to. But I would recommend maybe redshirt. And they didn't really do that a lot. I think I was the second redshirt ever for a non-medical reason. But if you had seen me play at that point, I was not ready for that big time. I mean, it was a dream come true, but it was also a reality check. Like, there were some big stud forwards ahead of me. And if you saw me play, even that second year in '87, after my redshirted, it was a work in progress. And somebody would have probably seen me play there and said, there's no way that guy's going to be anything, because I was kind of learning on the fly. And that's a tribute to me. For me, it's a tribute to the coaches at Carolina. In 4 years, I played every game. After I redshirted, I never stopped developing. So where I started as a freshman, it was constant and probably not as fast as anybody wanted. But when you got to be a senior, I think I was pretty solid. And coming from where I came from, it was a huge testament. I tell people all the time, if I had gone to, my home state of Alabama, gone to Alabama or any of the other schools, I don't know if I would have developed at all. I may have been on the bench and then never got off of it. So it was a tribute to the coaching staff, and really shows you what kind of coach Coach Smith was, that he could take, really anybody he gets and really develop them in his system, but also just provide them the skills necessary to move on.
What part of your game do you think you had to work on? We know you're a good shooter, but beyond that, what other aspects did you have to work on in college to get to the next level?
Well, when I grew up in Alabama, I went to a small private school. And so my average competition was, and I'm not going to sound racist or anything, but it was all white kids. At that time in Alabama, that's all the private schools were. And so my average competition was a 6'2" white guy that, and I was 6'7", so I had no competition. The summer camps was my first exposure to that. And then I get to Carolina, and you got the best of the best. So my growth consisted of just getting experience playing against these guys and developing the skills it takes to kind of do your thing and hold your own, more or less, because I wasn't the level of a J.R. Reed. I wasn't the level of some of these star guys. But what I could do, I was a big body, like you said, who could shoot, and being a smart player and being a good rebounder, things like that, getting stronger physically. And for me, a lot of mental confidence was needed to progress, because I was in shell shock, and then I had to develop the confidence to go with my game as I developed too. So there was across the board development. But the biggest thing was just getting used to the level of competition and the huge jump from that small private school in Alabama to the elite college players.
I mean, I'm guessing going against those kind of guys, a J.R. Reed, for example, in practice, and and seeing those guys on a daily basis and all these different NBA players. It had to be, not that the NBA wasn't a big leap, because of course it's going to be, because everyone is, is top of their game in the NBA. But being at UNC, like you mentioned, that had to be an advantage as opposed to other players and other colleges who maybe weren't playing against that kind of competition every day, and seeing that and playing for a Dean Smith, for example.
I think so. I think that you not only the stuff during the season, but you had the summer stuff going on with the guys, the pros coming back and playing those pickup games. But I don't know that I don't know any other school's program, how they do stuff and how they develop players. But again, the environment was for me presented to where if I worked hard, I'd get a shot. And they were hard on me. I mean, I had a lot of coaches yelling at me for sure. And the competition was very tough. All those guys that came in, they recruit 5 stars on top of 5 stars. So like you said, Clifford Rozier came in my senior year, and he was he was expecting to play right away. And at that point, I was at least good enough to hold him off for 1 year. Then he actually ended up transferring. But there was some great competition there, which I think, as you said, was the biggest thing that got me ready for the next level.
Now, did you ever get to meet MJ when you were in college? Did you ever come back? I know he was playing for the Bulls then, but did you ever come back in the summer, or did you ever meet him?
Yeah, he came back off and on during the summer. And, most of the Carolina guys back in my day would stay pretty much the whole summer, if not one of the summers, for some summer school work. And we always were playing. And I definitely remember him, I think, coming back, my second, third summer in that time frame. And yeah, just again, at that time, he was just, it was late 80s where he had just gotten past some of those really bad teams with the Bulls. So he was really developing, and he was an awesome scorer at that point. And it was obviously, there's many guys that came back and played, but obviously it was quite a show when he came back.
Oh, it had to be, I'm sure. So do you have one favorite moment playing at Carolina that you remember? Like, that's the game I always remember.
Well, unfortunately, my first game, fortunately and unfortunately, my first game I played in as my redshirt freshman year was J.R. Reed and Steve Bucknell got into a little shenanigans at a Raleigh bar, and they got basically sat down for the first game. So they were out of the first game, and that would happen to be the tip-off classic against Syracuse. Ronnie Cycli, Derek Coleman. They had just won the championship.
Was Billy Owens there too?
That was I think it was pre-Billy Owens. But
okay.
He could have been. My memory is not what it used to be. But we were shorthanded, and Rick Fox was also my running mate at that point. So I started. I had I think 14 points, 13 rebounds.
Wow!
It hit a turnaround jumper in regulation that hit the back of the rim and bounced about 6 feet up in the air, straight back through, that sent it to overtime. So wow. That was. What do you do after that, right? So. And again, but to be honest, that was one of my best games for a couple of years, because I was just forced to play a lot, and that actually came through that game. That's one of my best memories from college.
Well, I mean, going against DC, I mean, he was #1 overall pick, and he's a heck of a player. So that's definitely a great memory.
Yeah, it was awesome, and again, it was a team that just knocked us off in the Sweet 8 before with our great team we had. But it was a great way to start the season.
Did you know one last question about Carolina, when you left in 91, did you see them, with Lynch and those guys winning the championship in a couple of years? Do you think they had, at that point, you say, okay, these guys can develop into that kind of team, or was that more of a shock to you?
Well, that class that was so directly behind me was the Hubert Davis class. He was a great player. So that hit in 90, the year after I left, Hubert was a senior. He scored so many points, but they just didn't have enough stuff on that team to go very far. So after Hubert graduated, that's when George was a senior, and that's when that Montross class with Montross and Derek Phelps and Brian Reese and Pat Sullivan, and but I wouldn't even say any of those guys were great stars, but they were such a great team together. Like, they just did so well as a team. And I you never know. I think we had a chance to win it. I mean, they obviously had a chance to win it. When you get to the tournament, it's just about who performs during that Final Four and who performs in crunch time. And they actually performed great down that stretch in that tournament. It was awesome. Yeah.
I remember being a little kid. I was probably 9 or 10 and watching that game. I mean, it was a big deal. And I remember, the Fab Five in general, how big of just what they were, they're really iconic in many ways. And, they revolutionized the game. And, as far as just how wearing the black socks and just their swag. And, so that game, I think everybody expected Michigan to wipe you guys out. And I didn't see, you guys, Carolina winning that game, but I was shocked. And I know, Obviously, we all know about C-Webb and the timeout, but I mean, there's no question. I think, and no disrespect to the guys in Carolina, but Michigan had more talent, just raw talent. But in the starting lineup, especially. But you guys, you're right. They played as a team, and then that was a heck of a game.
Right. I should mention Donald Williams was outstanding in that game as well.
That's right. I forgot about Donald Williams.
The thing that shows from that game is what we don't have today is that game was upperclassmen, which we had, versus young team with a lot of talent, which everyone has these days.
That's a great point.
That's why I think if when Carolina wins these championships, as they've done recently, they have some upperclassmen.
That's a great point.
Really, the important thing is to have a blend, but you got to have some juniors at least to kind of solidify some of that stuff, because those young classes, like you said, they're really, really talented, but that's not going to get you through the tournament a lot.
No, you're right. And I'm a big Ohio State fan. I'm based in Ohio and Cleveland. And we had a team, with Greg Oden and Mike Conley Jr. This is probably, 10 years or about 15 years ago. And they were just too young. They played Florida. Of course, you had Joakim Noah and Horford. Those guys were all seniors. And they wiped us out in the championship game. It was just too much to overcome, even though I think we had just as much talent, but it was just too much, So that's an excellent point. 91, you get drafted by the Sacramento Kings. And at that point, they were kind of, that franchise obviously had some struggles in the 90s. And they just got Mitch Richmond at the time. You had an interesting team. I think Lionel Simmons was on the team, and Wayman Tisdale. And I mean, you had some really interesting players. Bobby Hurley a couple years later. So, give us a little rundown in your time with the Kings, and how was it? What did it feel like to be drafted into the NBA?
Well, I was in a cheap hotel in Chapel Hill with my dad on draft night, and Rick Fox was like 3 doors down. And I was surprised he went as late as he went, but I was, I had dreams about going, I think, to 20, because Houston had talked a little bit about me at 20, but I was just thrilled whenever I got drafted. It ended up being that last pick of the first round, and at that point, didn't really care where it was. I wasn't really keen on anywhere, just as long as I could get in the league. And Sacramento was a place to start. And I loved my chance out here. I loved, the thing about me is I'm big on relationships with teammates and the overall, camaraderie we have. And that didn't necessarily coincide with the wins, but we had some, I've been on some great teams as far as friendships and relationships and good teammates that haven't done very well. And those early teams, with the Sacramento, we had some really great guys. Like you said, Wayman Tisdale, you didn't mention Spud Webb was a great guy. But some really great teammates. And when Mitch came over for Billy Owens, Mitch was a great teammate. And we just didn't have at that point what I think it took to win, which was, a really superstar. We didn't have any of those guys. We had a bunch of, and Mitch was approaching that level, but we didn't have enough of those really great players to kind of make it work here. But those teams were fun. We sold out all the games. We had Dick Motta when I first got here, and he was a heck of a coach and an old school kind of guy. And I think a different coach every year I was here, but it was a fun way for me to start, even though we weren't winning. I was in the league. And to me, that was more important at that point.
Oh yeah.
Just being part of a team, and of course I'm trying to earn my place in the league and stay and get playing time. But just it was just a thrill to be in the league, and I was kind of doing whatever it took to stay here.
Well, it's those teams, like you were saying, Mitch was obviously a heck of a player, but you just didn't have, I mean, the complementary pieces to me you guys had were Walt Williams and, the Wizard, and you had, I forgot to mention, I think Dwayne Caldwell was on that team. So you guys had some really nice complementary pieces. Like you said, you just didn't have that one, superstar.
Well, yeah. The fact that my third year here, which is my best year, I was starting quite a bit with Wayman. And that, I mean, as much as I like that, I mean, we were lacking in the front court. Like Dwayne Caldwell wasn't the answer for a long-term starting center. And eventually, that's what got me out of here. Was they actually found a pretty good piece when they got Olden Polynice and traded me for him. And I hated that because I was really close to re-signing here, about a week away. And
wow.
And that's not it's a story if you want to hear it. But I got traded. Well, Dwayne Caldwell, you brought him up. He got traded for Olden Polynice. He's the one that got traded. And I remember sitting in the locker room, and me and Lionel Simmons and Wayne were kind of like, yeah, Cosby's going to be cold in Detroit. It's cold up there. Kind of making a little fun of him. And we literally have a game that night, and Olden is in the gym, and he's behind our bench because we're waiting for Coswell to get to Detroit and take his physical. Well, we lose the game, and I go out to eat at Fridays with my girlfriend at that time. And I get back to the house around 11, and there's my message light's blinking. And I'm like, I push play and it's Jerry Reynolds. And I'm like, before I even, listen to the call, like, it's not good when your general manager calls you at 11:30 at night. He's like, basically on the message, it's like, well, Pete Caldwell got to Detroit and he failed his physical. Oh, and God. Detroit wanted to know who else we had, and your name came up. And so
just your luck.
That's how I got traded. Thanks, Dwayne. And literally, my agent had just talked to Jerry Reynolds, and the next week my agent was flying into town. They were about to re-sign me to a 3-year extension. So wow. I went from a 3-year extension to trade to Detroit, who was in the midst of just rebuilding that team. They had some good players, but they were just dismantling that whole team. So they did not renew me there, and I was almost out of the league after that. That's how quick it can change.
Well, and you're right, because at the end, that was the end of the Bad Boys era, of course. They were all pretty much gone by then. And then you had the Grant Hill era. But so at that time, it ended up being kind of a blessing for you in some ways for obvious reasons, because what's going to come the next season. But, you look at that, my all-time, the Cavs are my favorite team just because I grew up in Cleveland and I'll always love that franchise. But my all-time favorite team, besides the 2016 Cavs who won the championship, would be those mid-90s Rockets with you on it. That we'll get into that in a second. But that team, your Rockets, to me, had the greatest complementary players, in my opinion, in NBA history, or at least some of them. And you look back at, we knew about the Dream. He's the whole different conversation. But the pieces you guys had around him fit so well. And the shooters, yourself, the shooters and the guys who knew their roles and how to play their roles. I mean, that was just, and the comebacks you guys had against certain teams, it was just unbelievable. So that summer, how did it all work out getting to Houston?
Well, so I got released by Detroit, and my agent was, I think they were called Advantage out of Washington, and but my real agent was Coach Smith. So I'm playing golf, I think, in South Carolina, and Coach Smith we're on the phone every couple of days, and he's like, Pete, there's not much going on. And you got an offer. Coach, I got an offer for to go over to Italy. He's like, well, you might want to take it. And I was like, okay. I mean, when Coach recommended I take a job in Italy, I was taking a job in Italy. So like literally, I got an offer. Called Coach Smith about it. About a week later, I took off and I was playing in Trieste, Italy, which is up near the upper on the back boot near on the northern coast of the where the Adriatic Sea is up there. And it was about 2.5 months. And my other American over there was named Larry Middleton. He was a player at Clemson, and he was a longtime Italian player, could really score. And he made it bearable. The coach was just, unbelievable. The stories you could hear about 2-a-days. We did 2-a-days every day. They went nonstop, hard. And the funny thing I tell kids, and I can't even make it sound real now, but we went one day and the guy's like, we're going to do Athletico. What's that? It's like weights. They called it Athletico. And we went in this gym, we're doing some weights, and he goes, all right, everyone line up. And you see that wall down there? It's about 30 yards away. He goes, there's a big mat. He goes, run into the wall as hard as you can. And I'm like, everyone else lines up and starts doing. I'm like, what are we doing? He's like, it'll make you tough. And I ran. He goes, run full speed and just run into the wall, like literally run into the wall. And I did it, and I kind of pulled up. He's like, no, don't stop. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, who has a drill when you run into a wall?
I've never heard of this.
And so to sum that story up, we played in Bologna one night, and we're losing. We weren't very good that year, and at halftime, well, during the first half, I threw the ball inside to a 6'10" Italian guy. The guy came around the back of him, stole the ball, and they went down and dunked it. They call a timeout. Coach, it's just this little coach who could not speak very good English, but he could cuss and yell, and he got really red. He's yelling. He goes, you threw the ball to shit player. Tonight I kill you. And he told me he's going to kill me. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to kill you. Like he threatened to kill me. He literally threatened to kill me.
Wow.
And I remember after the game, I was like, I went into took a shower, called my wife back into Trieste. I said, Monique, I said, when I get back, just pack everything up. We're out of here. And she's like, what? And so literally we got back that night, and we took the rental car that they had given me, and I drove to the airport with my 18 bags, and I bought a one-way ticket to New York City for, I think, $5,000 a piece. And we were gone. And my agent, the coach, everyone was like, what, and I'm like, dude, you threatened to kill me, like literally threatened to kill me in a game. I said, I don't love the game this much.
No, I'm just going to go on a limb and guess you don't keep in touch with that coach, or he did.
No, no, Virginia. I remember his name though, and he always, now after what happened following that, he always said, I know why he left. He left because he had a deal with Houston. And that was not the case. I was prepared to retire. I was prepared to retire at that point. I mean, he had just worn me out. And I got back and I told my agent, I was like, I'm done. You know, he's like, well, he goes, call me when you're driving back to Alabama to see my mom. He's like, call me on the way back. He goes, I might have something in the works. So I call him from Atlanta and he's like, can you get on the plane? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, Houston will sign you if you pass the physical tomorrow. I'm like, okay. I didn't have to twist my arm too bad. Like I was like, okay, no problem. So my girlfriend at that time took my truck back to Alabama. I flew to Houston, you know, worked out for Jim Boylan, who's now the Chicago coach, worked out for him, signed the next day, you know, for whatever minimum it was. And I think we had a game 2 days later and I was in uniform.
So that's an unbelievable story. So you literally went from leaving Italy and you know, considering retirement to signing with a team that's, you know, a championship team that's about to win another one. That's incredible.
No, and again, along lines of, I didn't stop to pay attention to the details. I was just like, airport, go to airport. Okay. Fly to Houston. Sure. They will play with Olajuwon. Okay, sure. You know, like you have to take the minimum. Believe me, that's no problem. Like it was just the stuff. And of course, that year we had there's a lot of injuries. And so the regular season, we weren't that great, you know, in Houston. I think 47 and something. So we had some issues, but it was definitely great for me as far as getting back in the league and then kind of establishing again what I could do.
Well, when I put your picture up on my page, a couple of your teammates actually comment. I think Tracy Murray made a comment, and a couple other guys made comments right away. So let's get into that season and get into the Rockets in general, because like I said, what a team that was. And you know, at that time, they're defending champions, or I'm sorry, they just won the championship against the Knicks the year before. What did you know about Rudy Tomjanovich as a coach, and how did he help your game?
Well, I didn't know too much about him. Obviously, we played against him, but you know, I didn't know much about him at all. Just other than his history as being a great player, and obviously the previous year being a part of that team that won a championship. He always, obviously, when you have former players that come in and coach, you kind of have that impression that they're pretty much a good players, coaches kind of guys, and he was. What he did was he built, obviously, built everything around the dream. And I was watching, just on a side note, I was watching the Clippers play when they got blown out the other night.
That was bad.
Yeah, I was watching that game, and I remember the whole quarter, I was like, they don't ever run any post-ups. Now, granted, they don't have a center. I can't remember who was in there as a big man, but like everything was just on the outside and cutting, pick and rolls and cutting, and like, it's so different than how we obviously did it in the past. Like, throw the ball in the dream, he'll kill you, or you'll double, and we'll throw it out. And as you mentioned, those players on that team, and I would say, you know, not only do we have good role players, we had great role players, and I think we had 8 of them. Like everyone who wasn't a star was a great role player, and that was the thing that made that team work, was that we didn't make it overly difficult. Like, everything kind of went to the dream. And then we went off that. And like, for majority of times, that was all we needed, because that was the single most impressive season. And now, especially in the playoffs, that I had ever witnessed in person from an individual player who, you know, the dream, as much as people call him a center, and he was about my size. Like, he was about 6'10", but the stuff he did was just unbelievable.
Well, you know, what was exciting? A couple of the guys I talked to that played with him in the past said that his footwork is just impeccable. That's what kind of set him apart. I mean, there's a lot of things he did that were different, but his footwork was so, you know, it was so unique, and that he almost played like a point guard in a center's body. So he just was, you know, I mean, you talk about some of the guys. I think I heard Gary Payton one time say that you couldn't defend Dream because there's nothing you could really do against him. He was just so, you know.
Yeah, the stuff he could do was so athletic yet smooth at the same time, and also he was strong enough to not, like, he did fadeaways, but not because you made him to, it's because he chose to. Like, he could do anything he wanted to, and make it look really smooth. And, you know, people say he would shuffle his feet or whatever, but the thing is that the thing I've noticed, you know, being in the league for 9 years, was the really, really great players, they make shots, you know, when you shouldn't make shots. Like I've done post moves before when like the defense is really good. Like it's just a hard, like he just made that turnaround jumper no matter what you did. It didn't matter if it was Shaq or Sean Bradley, you know, his size or big, he could just score. And again, you can't really sum it up by saying he did anything individually well. He just was that kind of player he brought the athletic ability with that couple years there where it was just rolling for him. And so impressive. I mean, to see him just kill David Robinson in at San Antonio when people just don't even understand how good David Robinson was. Like
Hall of Famer. I mean, incredible.
Yeah, like a stud, not only off defense, but he could score. I mean, he was an all-star, and he just made him look like a practice player trying to guard him. Like you might as well be on dummy defense.
I mean, some of those moves, I remember, and they still show that one where he goes baseline and I think fakes one way, goes the other way. I mean, you can't even, you know, I was showing my nephew some of these guys, and they're like, wow. I mean, Olajuwon was, the dream was he's my favorite athlete of all time, just because I love, not just because watching him play, but just who he was. He seemed like just a solid person, you know, but going against Robinson and like you said, Shaq, and I mean, he beat, you know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the '86. I mean, it was him. They beat Showtime Lakers in a series, which is incredible. It was him and Ralph Sampson. And then of course you beat Ewing, you know, Shaq and David Robinson in a 2-year span. I just don't think we'll ever see a center quite like him. You know, again, we have, you know, Embiid and guys like that today, but Dream was just he's in his own class, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially since they don't go to centers as much.
No.
You know, and I could get into the defense and all the stuff they're doing differently, but during that time period, yeah, there was no better center that I had seen, or just player in general. Yeah.
And what was he like as a teammate?
He was a great teammate because he was so, you know, he's very easygoing. Like he demanded a lot, but he would not in a way that made you feel like, you know, he was being unfair. Like he you know, he kicked it out. He wanted you to make the shot or make a good shot. You know, just very encouraging. I remember guarding the mailman in that playoff series. I started, I think, the first 3 series, and you know, the best thing he told me was, you know, just hold him off and don't worry, I'm coming. Like, because I would get down there and I'd be pushing with everything I had to hold off the mailman, which is kind of a hard thing. But I had to do that for like 2 seconds, because as soon as he started to make the move, we were just doubling with Akeem. And then when it got to really, really crunch time, he would just guard him. I mean, he was that kind of guy that not only, and he doesn't get the credit for the defensive part, but he was just solid. You know, if you need to shut somebody down, he would guard the mailman as opposed to, you know, putting somebody else on. So he was just a great teammate because he demanded a lot, but he provided a lot. And it's good to have somebody on any team you're on that has the bar set pretty high. You know, if you have nobody like that on your team, you're not going to succeed. And I think all those great teams have somebody like that.
Well, and you talked about Dream's defense. It was Jordan who said, you know, he picked Akeem as his center for his all-time team. He said, I'd take Dream. And he said, Dream, you know, when he retired in the top 10 in 4 different statistical categories, including steals, which is just incredible. I mean, for basically a 6'10" center, you know, and that showed you how diverse Akeem's game really was. So again, he was just I mean, so all the young kids never saw him play. Go YouTube Akeem Olajuwon, and you can watch him for 2-3 hours. He was just absolutely incredible. But let's get back to the other role players in that team. Sure. And I want to give a quick shout out to my buddy Dan, who's going to watch this, because he is a huge Robert Horry fan. And he started back in the Rockets days. He was obsessed with Robert Horry. So, and he loved the Rockets because of Horry, and then of course Dream and all you guys. So when I told him you're going to be on the show, you know, instantly he's like, "Oh my God!" You know, he knows exactly who you are. But you know, the shooters that you guys had on that team, I think you guys are all kind of underrated in a sense. Like everyone talks about Dream, but Kenny Smith, you know, you had Mad Max, you had you know, yourself, you had, you know, all those guys. I mean, you know, Robert Horry, Tracy Murray, a ton of guys who can shoot. What was you said the philosophy obviously was feed it to Dream. Either he kills you, or if they double him, one of you guys, you know, hit the shot. So, but what was, you know, offensively when Dream was out of the game, what did you guys do? What was the philosophy then?
Well, I think a little bit different than you might think, because those guys, I mean, Sam Cassell, I would say it was a scorer. Scorer as opposed to shooter. Kenny Smith, shooter. And I would hesitate to say Robert Horry was a shooter, or Mario Elie or Vernon Maxwell. Those guys were players. Like they were really good players who could shoot. Like they weren't you go to some of these teams now, and you got 7 guys who can shoot a spot up three. Well, can they get down on the post? Like Ori could score on the post, no doubt. Like when he developed, I think he'd make a huge step in those couple of years when he won the championships and developed from just a shooter to somebody who could just do pretty much anything and plus be a lockdown defender. And Mad Max, and Mario Ellie were great players in my mind, as opposed to just shooters. And that's a big difference to note for me, is because I was a shooter, and this is flatline it there. Like these guys were taking their games and they could do other things. So when you had Akeem out, right, we could go through Drexler in that last year, or we could go a lot of pick and roll with Kenny and Robert, or Kenny and myself. So there's a bunch of different options. Make no mistake that it was based on being able to score off those double teams. But we had a lot of players on that team that really could just play the game. I mean, Clyde Drexler was outstanding that second year. Robert Horry was huge in that Orlando series. I think he was 21-10, and just shooting lights out. So we had players who could shoot, not just shooters. That's for sure.
That's an excellent point. And you mentioned before, they weren't just good role players, they're great role players and all-time role players. And I think Robert Horry, you can argue he's one of the top 3 or 4 role players in NBA history. Just all the Big Shot Bob, all the shots he made over his career, 7 championship rings. And then Sam Cassell turned into an all-star, of course. I mean, Kenny, fantastic player. So Mario Ellie hit the kiss of death shot. So you guys had so many, iconic role. I mean, I hate to say role players, but I mean, guys who at that time were, playing a certain role, but did it so well that, I mean, it was almost like you guys had multiple stars in the team, even though really Dream, because Drexler was a little bit older at that time. He wasn't what he was 3-4 years before, but he was still a heck of a player. But Dream was really the lone, superstar. But yet you played, watching you guys, it felt like there was 3 guys on the floor who were stars. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, those guys, as you said, any one of those guys, I mean, Ori, Mario, Mad Max, Kenny, Sam, they could get 20 any night. Like, and you can't find teams with that much depth, during that time for sure. And there's a lot more teams that have scorers now, but as far as, just have 5 or 6 deep, they could hurt you in a lot of ways. I mean, that was really unique. Yeah.
I totally agree. And let's run through that playoffs. You had Utah the first round. I think it was in '95, and you guys were down 2-1, I believe. So what was the attitude at that point? Because you guys were down a lot in those playoffs, and you guys obviously overcame some odds. So what was it like being down 2-1 to Stockton and Malone? And, what was the mood like? And did you guys think you still had a good chance at that?
We really did. And in my memory, I think what happened in that first game, we lost the first game when I thought we should have won it. And I think I was partially to blame for that. I think I had a rebound that they stole from me right at the end, kind of got a little lead at the end. We won game 2. And I think I don't remember the progression. I know we were down 2-1, like you said. The thing that reminded me of that last game, the deciding game, was we were down 12 in the fourth quarter. And not only down in the series, but in that last game, deciding game, we had to come back in the fourth quarter. And what I tend to remember through that series and most of these series is that we never stopped doing what we did. Eventually, what we were doing was going to work. Dream was going to kick in. Our defense was going to get some stops. These other guys were going to hit some big shots. And in that series, for sure, I mean, down 12 in the fourth quarter in Utah was a huge start. And again, this is my first playoff experience. I didn't know any better. I think I did start that series. I was playing maybe 15, 20 minutes a game, just kind of getting in there the first quarter, getting in the third quarter. I think I had a good first game 1, but not much after that. But really, it was us playing Houston Rockets basketball. And as you can see, as we go through these series, like, things were getting better every series, but we had to get past those Jazz, who were obviously destined for greatness later on. But those 2 great players they had, I don't think they had the depth that we had, going down the stretch. And I think I can't give you the reason we came back from in that series down 12, but we just stuck with what we were doing and pulled that series out.
I mean, like you said, being down 12 at the Delta Center at that time which still is a tough place to play, but back then it was a really tough place to play. So that's especially against Jerry Sloan, and it's such a well-coached team in Utah. So then the second round you play, this is one of the greatest series, in my opinion, in NBA history with Phoenix and you guys. And I watched Game 7 when the quarantine first started back in April. They were playing all these old games, and Game 7. I mean, it's just such a classic game. And people, I was telling my nephew, watch this game. It's one of the greatest games you'll ever watch. Because I put the kiss of death photo up, and I said that's the game that happens. And so
Yeah.
let's go to that series. And what starting off, of course, you're down 3-1 at that time. In your mind, if you're to be honest about it, were you thinking we're done? Because Sir Charles, you got KJ, you got all these guys, Marley. Or do you think we can make this comeback? We can, because 3-1's a pretty monumental task.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, in the first 2 games, we got blown out in Phoenix, just blown out. I think Clyde got ejected from one of those games. So we came back, and we always felt good coming back home. I do remember, we were a 6 seed, so we had to really take care of our business at home, or we'd be toast. So I remember getting back to game 3, and we won it. And I think everyone's like, here we go. Now we're back in the groove again. But then we lost game 4. And again, they had a really good team. They had, the Barkley guy, the Kevin Johnson, game 5, I felt like we were really confident at home, and although we did outstanding on the road in that series, in the playoffs, we hadn't established that yet. So we were still trying to struggle to get those road wins at this point. And so we won we lost game 4, go down 3-1. I remember going to Phoenix at game 5, and I think it was Wesley Person had a wide open top of the key jumper at the end of regulation to win the game. And we're done. And he was a great shooter. Mm-hmm. And it lips out. I think we go to overtime, or somehow we win game 5. But that was like totally on them. They could have won that right there. We win game 5. We felt great going back home for game 6, and we took care of our business in game 6. But as you said, game 7 was one of the, again, this is my first time through. So I'm like, everything to me is my greatest, but that was my greatest game 7 of all time, just because of, like you said, the competition and the fact that I think I had a decent game. I think I had, we were down. I think I watched that same thing you watched during the COVID. We were down. I think I came in, I hit a shot sometime in the 3rd quarter, kind of around the 70-point mark, kind of gave us a little lead, and it was nip and tuck going down the stretch. And the thing that game was, with Mario and I remember all our big guys just did what it took down the stretch, and of course the kiss of death is famous, but it was just one of those most competitive series, mainly because there was a lot of, I remember early on, go backtrack a little bit, Barkley had made a comment. I know you might find it hard to believe that he made a comment in the paper or something. But
I would never guess that.
He said, "Who's going to guard me in this series? Pete Chilcutt?" Like, he kind of scoffs. And I was more of a reserve player back then. I think of all these great things I could have said now. Me and my friend. but it was I couldn't guard him. But again, that wasn't my job. My job was to hold up these guys until we double teamed. All the great players got double teamed. So Barkley was a great player, and by no means could I guard him one-on-one, but what we could do was make it hard on him, and he get his points. I think he got his points for sure, but make it tough on him to score and do what we do on the other end, and we take care of business. And we kind of did that down the stretch, but it was a great win just because, like you said, that series being down 3-1, I think, that may have been historic at that point to come down from being 3-1, but it was a great win for Houston. And my first and my best game 7.
Did you, in the locker room after that game, it had to be just incredible, like knowing that you guys overcame that, especially the nip and tuck game 7 in general, not to mention the 3-1 deficit. Were you guys confident at that point? Like, okay, I don't care if we have to play San Antonio. I think they were the number 1 seed, but we're going to take care of business.
Well, I think it definitely, there was a switch that turned, and in our mental approach, we kind of finally clicked what we needed to do on the road. And unfortunately for me, you'll see what happened in the next series, but it kind of, I think, helped Rudy see a little bit clearer what he needed to do for this team to kind of move forward more. But there was that team, if you remember correctly, they had done the exact same thing to Houston, to Phoenix in the previous year when they beat them. I think they were also down 0-2 in that series. So it was there's a lot of confidence that they just kind of switched over from, play hard guys, we'll take care of. It's like, oh, we can take care of business if we do this, this, and this. So I think there's a big switch there after that series for sure.
Let's talk about David Robinson and Akeem and that whole thing. And that year, David Robinson had won the MVP. And, we all know now that I think it was Kenny Smith said, like, dreams, like, that's my trophy. That I should have had that trophy. And he came out and, man, he gave him, I felt bad. Even Robinson after the game. He goes, I was guarding him as well as I could. I don't know what else I could do. And you're talking about one of the greatest, low post defenders of all time in Robinson, not just some guy who, this is an all-time great defender, and Dream just worked him over. So, what was it like watching that, especially those moves that he made? I mean, he was making iconic moves that were just no one had ever seen before. What was that like to watch that?
Well, Robinson, 7 feet, just chiseled, could jump, long arms, like you said, great defender, MVP, and not without merit. I mean, he was a great player. So never take anything away from what he accomplished in that year. What happened was he caught the Dream when the Dream was just rolling. Like the Dream, remember, again, he had been out a couple times that season, never got in great sync as a team. We didn't really excel during the whole regular season, but in that playoffs, it took those first 2 series. I think by the time we got to San Antonio, not only the team, but also Akeem kind of figured out, I can do, well, he could do whatever he wanted. And like you said, I want to say I feel sorry for the guy. It was extremely enjoyable. And we're on the bench going like, covering our mouth. Like, the stuff he was doing was the stuff you do in the park. Like he'd do the fake like this, and and guys would jump, and he'd spin around the other way. I mean, he was making guys look silly, and it made it look so easy. And if you know Akeem, like he never was disrespectful. He never, as far as I know, talked to any, smacked anybody. He just went out there, worked his butt off, and just did the great things. He did great things very greatly. It's like it was really impressive to watch him firsthand for sure.
It was definitely one of the most impressive individual performances in a series I've ever seen, especially from a center. And it was Rodman and Robinson around that team. So you had 2 of the best low post defenders in the history of the NBA that couldn't stop Dream. And that's just, it's a testament to how great he was. But that series sticks out of my mind. That whole playoff for you guys sticks out of my mind. But especially watching him, that first game against Robinson, I think he put up like 43 or some ridiculous amount. And I thought, wow, I mean, that was incredible. So yeah. You guys take care of business in 6 games against the Spurs. You're going to face Shaq and Penny. And back then, again, for the young kids watching, Penny Hardaway was, at that time, a rising star. I mean, he was an incredible player. Never really got to fulfill all that because of his injuries. But, Shaq even said in a documentary, I watched a documentary on them called This Magic Moment. And it was about that period of Orlando basketball. And Shaq says Penny and Shaq was Kobe and Shaq before Kobe and Shaq. And, for the kids who never knew Penny, don't know who he is. I mean, just an incredible player, point guard, kind of played a little bit like Magic Johnson, he just had a lot of game and about 6'7". So you guys go into that series, and I honestly thought that they were going to beat you. I thought like, these guys, Horace Grant, and they had a nice team, D. Scott and Nick Anderson and, Donald Roy and all those guys. I thought, with Shaq and Penny, it just seemed like that was going to be a tough one to overcome. And of course, you guys wiped them out in 4 games, but game 1, and I feel bad for Nick Anderson because, great player, good guy. And I know he gets a lot of flack because of those missed free throws at the end, but what was that game like? That was another classic game that, went back and forth. And what was that like playing in NBA Finals, number 1 and number 2 against Shaq and Penny in that first game?
Well, obviously, very, very, very the finals. You can't say anything else about that. Just big time stage. And the competition, like you said, was outstanding. And I don't, we as you said, the switch, we turned that switch with San Antonio. And of course, we don't know that at the time, but we were going to start playing better and better. But that first game was crucial. And had we lost that first game, which was right there for the losing, who knows how this turns out. But and again, Nick Anderson, again, great guy. Guys miss shots all the time. I remember Kenny Smith had a great game 1 as well. Dream, I think, had a tip in. We had some big plays that kind of helped us on our end. And whatever that turning point was, that was it for that series, because we didn't know at the time, but we started rolling, especially when we got to game 2, 3, and 4. And we got back home, we kind of knew, but I think it helped being on the road early in all the playoffs to kind of help us, because we struggled in Utah, we struggled with Phoenix. We won our first 2 games on the road in San Antonio, and we took care of business in Orlando on the road. But I think we couldn't have done that without going through those. I can't remember. I think 3 of those teams were 60-win teams, or 4. I mean, we went through some teams that had been dominant all season. And getting to that final stretch, that helped us prepare to kind of, get past that game 1, but also take care of business down the stretch.
And you're right. That game one seemed like that was the game that it just Orlando was almost demoralized after that. It seemed like it just never recovered, from that game. And I feel like they were young too, obviously with Shaq and Penny. Shaq was so young in his career at that point, but he was so dominant so early that you just thought that this guy's gonna, they're gonna take it. But I mean, it really showed that chemistry and veteran leadership, plays a role just because, they didn't have that, that star veteran. They had Horace was a great veteran, of course, but, Shaq and Penny are really the stars of that team. And it just seemed like they couldn't get past that. I mean, you guys, I remember watching the rest of that series and it wasn't even fun though. You guys just blew them out. I mean, it was just, you knew you guys were going to win. And by the fourth game, it was just, you could tell they're just demoralized. They could not even,
Yeah. And we didn't have mentioned, of course, you guys know this, but that's when the series that the previous series was when Rudy made the switch to the smaller lineup. He went from the small lineup to the smaller lineup with put Ori at the 4, basically took me out of the lineup. And that's when he really excelled. And I think that was unfortunately a great coaching move because what happened was you saw Ori now being guarded by a 4-man, which is really opened up his game. They couldn't get out there and contest him, or he could drive by him. And so Horace Grant was trying to guard him. And, Ori was really a 3 guy, but now he's playing the 4, and it made it really tough on Orlando. And plus the fact that he was playing lights out. We had the other guys, like you said, with Drexler and Smith and Cassell and Mario. And I mean, we had other guys, but that's when we kind of made that switch from, we're kind of surviving here to now we're thriving. And that's what happened with that move that Rudy made.
I remember Shaq talking about the first couple of plays against Dream in game 1. And he says, he goes, I thought he goes, I knew Dream was amazing, but when I faced him in the finals, and I think he said, I gave Dream a bow and I, put a shot up and, Dream just kind of laughed. He goes, I couldn't shake Dream. I couldn't rattle him. He came right back down and scored on me. And then you could just tell, I just couldn't, there's nothing I could do to rattle Dream. He goes, or I could rattle some of the other centers in the league at that time. He goes, I couldn't get under Dream's skin. And he goes, I knew that, I mean, Shaq has a lot of respect for Dream. He always talks about how that's his favorite center. But I think that series, I don't think anybody thought that Orlando was going to get swept. I mean, even if they were young, yes, but they had so much talent, and Shaq was such a rising superstar that no one could have predicted that. And you guys, again, it was a heck of a series for you guys and a testament to really the chemistry that, Dream and the rest of the guys in the team and Rudy had built the last couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. And what I noticed about that competition between Shaq and the Dream was he always did his work, but he didn't talk. Now, I'm not going to say for sure, but he didn't talk. Like, he wasn't disrespectful to, he treated everybody kind of, you're the opposition. I'm trying to score on you, but that's it. Like, he was respectful. He would make comments about to us, like, this Shaq guy, like, dude, he's gigantic, he's strong. Like, he'd be like, but he was a very playful kind of guy away from the game. So he'd make jokes about how big the guy was and how dominant he was. But when he got on the court, like, he just took care of business. Like you said, you couldn't get under his skin. Now, I know he got into some fisticuffs earlier, but during that title run, he was just calm, cool, took care of business, respectful, and just dominant. Like you said, I would say he didn't dominate Shaq like he did Robinson, but he put up solid numbers. I mean, Shaq was just, at that point, he was always a great player, but he was so mobile at that young age. It was a tough matchup. There's some things he could do on the court that you just couldn't stop. If he ran the court with his speed, I mean, there was a lot of centers that couldn't keep up with him. And plus, he was so big and could jump. I mean, it was a tough matchup. But when he could do that, the Dream, like you said, would go down the court and just do his stuff, and it'd be a wash. So that was a great matchup to watch as well.
Oh, it really was. And it was fun, obviously seeing what Shaq became later in his career. I almost feel that gave Shaq the experience. I mean, he was, let's be honest about it. He never faced a center quite like Akeem ever again in, the finals. Yeah. So that was, I think that kind of gave him a little bit of confidence moving forward after that, knowing, okay, if I can, go toe to toe with this guy, and I didn't win, but I could face him and go toe to toe with Akeem. There isn't a center that's, that's going to give me problems like that guy could.
Well, let's clear that up now. I guarded Shaq when I was with the Clippers in 1999. I was playing center, and I think Shaq would agree that may have been the second most toughest matchup. He happened to score his career high that game. 61.
Oh, that was a 61-point game.
Yeah. now let's clarify. Olowokandi got, I think it was called Shaqitis. Is that what it's called? Like, and I think did you have Boss Kloss on your show?
I did. I had Boss Kloss on my show. Yep.
Boss Kloss was the other center. Is me, Boss Kloss, Olowokandi, and Anthony Avent.
Anthony Avent, wow.
Yeah, I watched the tape. He only scored 35 on me. So I scored 13. So net plus, I'm minus 23.
Hey, 20, that's not bad against Prime Shaq. Hey, I'll take it.
That was right before they made those runs, and they
Yep.
had an awesome team. And he was, although not as slender as he was early on, he was really a dominant player, obviously, right around 2000.
So actually, let's get to that real quick. Facing that Shaq 4 or 5 years later, he was so big and so monstrous. Like, how did you, there was really nothing you could do. I don't know anybody that could have stopped him.
I was 240. I want to say he was listed at 320, 330, and that was probably being kind. Just with him, the thing that was frustrating was, you could do all you wanted, but he could hit the 10-foot hook shot or the turnaround jump shot from 7-8 feet. Like, he wasn't just the dunk guy. And then when he threw in the power moves, I had obviously no chance, but like, who did? I remember some of the big centers, he would just get down low and just turn and just throw an angry dunk down on them. And that was the thing about him going down the stretch, was that power. He had more finesse than people think. He could handle the ball in open court, and he wasn't just the power guy. He had moves. He had some post moves. Now, he wasn't quite at Dream's level, but he was really, really, really effective down there against big time centers. So that was my gift to Shaq. It was his birthday, so that's why I let him score those 61. But it was that may have been what kicked me out of the league, I think, actually.
Yeah, that was a game I'll never forget. That was right after, I think it was like early March, right after the All-Star break. It was right after Vince Carter put on that show at the All-Star game, or the slam dunk contest. And Shaq and Kobe, like you said, at that point, that was the first season they won a championship, but we hadn't known they were going to be that great at that point. We didn't know what they're going to be. So, it's interesting that you got to face Shaq in the finals years earlier when he was a young kid, and then see him, really developing into the Shaq that we know now, who is just dominant, the 3-peat, the 4 championships, all the MVPs, et cetera.
Yeah, I would say the big difference, just on closing that up, would be 5 years earlier, he was not nearly as assertive as he developed himself. Like, he could do all the things, but he just wasn't that kind of personality early on, where he got the ball and just did all the stuff with kind of power and assertiveness. He developed that obviously big time, and not to say he wasn't a great player, but he just developed that to where he became unstoppable. So
I know you played for Vancouver for a few seasons, and I want to talk about, a young team at that point, or an expansion team. What was it like playing for, an expansion team? Because not many people had that experience. And, they were still, I think, you played for them in year 2, I believe you started there?
Started the year, and I was there from 96 through 90 for 3 years. So 96 through the 99 season. And it was, one of those things where one more year in Houston after that championship year, and then I had a new deal, but it was going to be basically 3 years in Vancouver. And if anything, I'm going to say, hey, wherever I'm in, I'm going to try to make it work. And that first year, Big Country had just been established as the go-to guy. I think they just drafted Sharif in the draft.
Greg Anthony was on that team, I think.
I'm sorry?
Was Greg Anthony on that team?
Greg Anthony, yeah, he was on. There's several guys that came and got. He was on that team at some point for sure. Greg Anthony, Blue Edwards.
Yep.
Guys, there are a lot of guys. So you can imagine.
Oh, there are a ton of guys. Yeah.
Mike Bibby came in, I think, the next year. In that first year, though, the coach was Brian Winters, and it was bad news when I got traded there, and I guess they didn't tell him about the trade in the front office. He's like, in the paper, I just rolled in the tennis. Like, I don't know how we can play Chilcott and Country together. Like, they're not athletic enough. And to his word, he didn't play me that year. Like, wow. I don't think he liked me. Obviously, with that matchup with Big Country being on the same front court, I played minimal for him that first year, and it was tough going back to the Pine. And then they got rid of him and brought in. I think they had Stu Jackson for a little bit as an interim coach, and they brought in Brian Hill, who was the Orlando coach.
Yep.
And 100% different. He loved me. If you'd watch his teams, he'd always had kind of a guy to go with his big guys. He had Jeff Turner.
Oh yeah, remember him well.
So I think maybe fit that role for him. So I played a lot more consistently with him and loved him as a coach. I mean, he was for what we had there. I think he was a perfect coach. And we didn't have much. We had a lot of struggles up there for sure, but he was a great coach for me anyways in my last couple of years up there.
And I think it's kind of neat that you got to be on an expansion team the first 3 or 4 years of an expansion team. I mean, that not many people can say that. And it's a team now that, of course, is established in the NBA. But back then, 25 years ago, they weren't established. And I mean, I remember thinking like it was so weird to have the Raptors and the Grizzlies at that point. It was just, I wasn't used to it, And then the jerseys I love the jerseys now. But back then, people were making fun of them. And, it was just a whole different. It's funny. Anytime I post the Raptors or Grizzlies, I get a ton of people that love it because it's just like, but back then, it was very different. And so it's neat that you got, you played for a championship team and then you went to play for an expansion team. I think it's, to look back in your career, I'm sure it's an interesting mix to have that in two very different experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And taking the basketball out for a second, the basketball part, Vancouver is an awesome city. My wife and I were married that time, and it was by far, I think, one of the best cities we lived in as just for a city. It was a big city, but it felt like a small city. And the fans were great for what we had, and it was just the quality of life was really good up there. So we really enjoyed that. But like you said, going from a championship to winning, 15 games one year. I mean, just the losses and although we know we're an expansion team, like we're all guys that are trying to make it in the league, and so it leads to a lot of pointing fingers and like I'm doing my part, you're not doing yours. So it's a lot different than a playoff team when you're trying to build a team and you don't have necessarily all the players you want or the coaches you want. It's just a work in progress. So it was tough.
Yeah, they had to be. And I was actually talking to Boss Kloss about the Clippers and that whole era, and he's like, it was really tough playing on teams that weren't winning a lot, and then just it's just not a fun thing to do. So in your career, Pete, when you look back, and I want to go over a couple more things with you. Number one, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any favorite teammate or teammates that you look back and you're like, those are my guys? I know you're close with, I think, J.R. Reed and some of those guys from college, but is there anybody else that you're, go give us a favorite college teammate or a couple of favorite college teammates and a couple of favorite Rockets teammates?
Well, the guys I went to college with, right in my class, with the guy you probably never heard of was Jeff Denny. He was a sharpshooter who came out, was a freshman with me, and to this day, I think he could have been a great player if he just stopped pump faking. And then JR and Scott Williams, we're still pretty tight with those guys. It is just hard as you get older, as you get spread out, to keep in touch all the time. But one of my best friends from college is still Hubert Davis. Of all the guys, I keep in touch the most with him. Still obviously in the Chapel Hill area, and so I go back there quite a bit. He's really got a nice setup there with his family and the coaching job, and it's just he's a really, really great guy, and that really helps with these long relationships that go over 30 years. Is that you can always count on somebody like Hubert to be there for you. And then once you get in the league, it's a little different. None of that, you lose that kind of college fun, rah stuff. But guys I play with in Sacramento, like Spud Webb was a great teammate, friend. Guy out here, Jim Les, who is still out here coaching at UC Davis, was a great friend and teammate. Moved on to Houston, Chucky Brown, Eldridge or Kastner, guys like that. Of all people, like I call myself friends sometimes with some of these really big star guys, but like, what's that really mean? But like, literally during like the pandemic, about April or May, I got a call from Clyde Drexler just checking up on me. So like, wow. And I was like, well, I had talked to him off and on throughout the years. Like we talked a little bit a couple years ago at the Big Three, but that meant a lot to me. Like he was like, I was sitting around watching old playoff games that got on TV, and me and my boys, we kept on talking about who's that Chilcott guy. Like he's knocking down shots. Like I'll just call and check up on you. How you guys doing? So it's just guys that you are quality people, and you just lose touch with some of these guys going throughout the years. But he was a good guy. Chucky Brown, like I said. Moving on to the Vancouver Big Country, although I think they found him. I think they were looking for him. The Where Big Country documentary. Yep. I think they found him. I think I knew he was there the whole time.
How's he doing, by the way? What's he up to these days?
He owns that ranch in Oklahoma, which I could have told, if anybody asked me, I could have told him that's where he was. He always said, I'm going to take all my money and buy a ranch, and that's what he did. So he literally has a ranch where he has some cattle, and big old, probably many acres of protected land, but that's big country. He probably living on that first paycheck.
Wow. You got to tell him, I get so many big country requests, like private messages, put big country up. So if you ever talk to him, say he's people love when I post big country.
Yeah, I don't know. The only person I think might have his contact number is the guy that was a teammate with us in Vancouver, which is Rich Manning. Rich played the league. He's from this area in Sacramento. And him and Rich are pretty tight, but yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. No, it's just
yeah,
funny because there's so many different guys I get requests for, that you put this guy up, put that guy up. But Big Country's one of them I get all the time.
Well, he was a great guy and a great scorer, but extremely, like, he kept things extremely simple. Like, his life was not full of any drama. He was at that point just a pretty simple man. Like, went to work, came home, didn't do anything else. Like, we'd be on the plane playing $5 blackjack. He just signed a $60 million deal. He's like, I ain't playing no blackjack. $1 a dollar's a dollar. Like, he wouldn't play $1 blackjack. I'm like, come on. But a great guy, great teammate. George Lynch, played with him obviously in Vancouver.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, when I got to the Clippers, that team worried me a little bit going in, because I don't think I knew anybody on that roster going in. And I was like, I was telling my wife, I was like, they don't win a lot. Like, maybe there's a bunch of jerks in that team. And there was some of the nicest guys on that team I played with, including Boss Kloss, who was, just a great personality. I'm sure you had a great.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
But there, Eric Piatkowski was on that team.
Yep, Piatkowski. Was Nesby on that team, and you guys had obviously Candyman. Mo Taylor, I think, was on that team.
Taylor. So just that was great. We had a kind of funny, we had coaches that Chris Ford started with Chris Ford, and then he got fired, and Jim Todd came on board, and going down the stretch, Jim Todd's like, he goes, Chili, I got a call from the owner, who at that point was that when they Sterling.
Yeah.
I got a call from the owner. He goes, they don't want me to play you anymore. I was like, all right, I just signed like for the rest of the season for like another month. I was like, he goes, if you cause a stink, they're just going to cut you. He goes, that's just me and you just ride this out, and they'll just let us both go at the end. And that's what happened. Like, they fired him. They didn't want me to play anymore. It was a mess for sure, that whole organization. But from my relationship with the teammates, it was like awesome. Like, I really enjoyed my time there. It was the spring in LA. They put us up in Marina Del Rey. What else can you ask for?
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's a shame that the organization was so messed up from the top, of course. And I mean, because Boss Kloss did the same thing. He was like, he loved his teammates, but it was just the organization was not where it should be. So, but when you look back at your career, you're in the NBA specifically, you have one favorite memory outside of the championships? Obviously, that's one thing. But outside of that, is it the Game 7? Is it what's a favorite memory of yours?
Well, actually, I'll probably go back to my just to be greedy, my individual, my first year in Houston, Dream was out, and he missed 2 games in a row, and we're at Denver, and we're at home against Dallas, and they showed both those games on one of these ESPN shows this past pandemic. But in Denver, Clyde Drexler hit the game winner from like 38 feet away. But I hit my career high that first game. I had 25 and 9.
Wow. We
come back home, and we play Dallas. Jason Kidd is I think a rookie or something.
Mashburn on that team. Yeah, all those guys.
Yep. I think it was triple overtime. We lost, but I had 22 and 11. So my 2-game running total was 23 and 10. And then Rudy has the nerve to come up to me before the next practice. He goes, you are playing really awesome. You really deserve to start, but Dream's coming back. And I was like, and he's like, you're gonna have to come off the bench. I was like, Rudy, I'm okay with that. Go ahead. But so that's my best memory, is my best 2-game stretch. And like, who knows what it could have been? What could have happened? But then
you could have been the one schooling Robinson. Who knows?
That's my 2-game story. So that's my funnest memory. Plus, as you said, winning championship, you can't beat that.
No, you can't. Now, Pete, when you look back at your career, and I ask this to everyone that comes on the show, especially talking to the younger kids watching, younger generation, never got to see you play. What do you want them to know about, Pete Chilcutt's legacy?
Well, my legacy is that if you're in your driveway, in your middle school or high school years, and you're shooting around with your friends because you love basketball, that's the first place to start. And if you're already sitting there and your dad's telling you that you should be on the AAU team, and you're already thinking you should be playing up to the U18 level, like, that's not me. Like, I'm the guy who just loves to play, and happened to get the right breaks and play well at the right time to get noticed by the right people. I'm a big believer in developing players, the younger kids, to have all-around skills. I tell people all the time, I was this stretch four before there was a stretch four. And I mean, I wasn't the first one or definitely the only one, but the stuff I could do would have made me so rich these days.
Exactly right.
Yeah. I remember that second year in Houston, there was a write-up in like basketball, preseason basketball magazines, like, Chilcutt's coming back. He's 6'10", shot 40% from the 3-point line last year. But what's he doing out there anyway? Like, that was actually in the magazine. Like, what's the 6'10" guy doing outside? So it wasn't valued back then. And I didn't value it as a player. I was hesitant shooting the three because I thought I should be more of like a post player. I mean, that's how I was raised. So develop your skills as a young kid. I mean, that's kind of my strength was be a good shooter, be a good rebounder, be solid in everything you can be, and just when you need to perform, perform. But that's my legacy, is I could do, I'm just your average guy who could do a lot of things decent, nothing really great, tall, that helps out, and I got the right breaks, I took advantage of them. Like, take advantage of the opportunities that come your way, and you'd be surprised what can happen. Because as I said, I didn't think I could play at Carolina, never thought I could play in the NBA. And I'm a 9-year vet, won a championship, play with some really awesome players. Some of the top 10 players of all time I play with, and just a great fortunate story, but a great outcome to what can happen, if everyone just takes that approach.
You really had an awesome career. I mean, from Dean Smith in Carolina all the way through. I mean, I know the ending with obviously the Clippers and Vancouver wasn't ideal necessarily, but just everything that happened to you, I feel it was a pretty great career, and you got a ring, and you have all these, you got a lot out of it, and it seemed like you made a lot of good friends, and it's just I think your story is great, and it's one of those stories too, like you said, starting off in the driveway and just working hard every day and trying to be the best you can, and the breaks will come eventually, if you keep doing what you got to do. But it's an awesome story. So
I appreciate.
What are you up to these days?
I'm a homeschool teacher, so I know when I say that, everyone says, well, everyone's a homeschool teacher these days, but so I'm in California, and I've been working with the homeschool charter school for about 11 years now. So our model is you teach your kid at home, I come to your house, and I visit you once a month to make sure you're doing all the right curriculum and kind of assess the student work. And I do that for about 36 kids, and we do that all year. So it's just a charter school that's basically homeschool. But of course, everyone's doing that now. So it's really, really kind of out there, but I've been doing that for 11 years. We just recently started up with a buddy of mine here in town, started up a Clutch City Basketball Academy.
I saw that.
Kind of born out of the pandemic. Like, we had talked about it for years, but like just didn't have a impetus to really get going with it. And plus I have my own kids who I didn't want to take away from them. So we started doing this, basically some summer camps, trying to get some of the kids in our community to come out. We get local businesses to sponsor the kids, like if they couldn't afford it. So just kind of getting kids out there. It wasn't like a AAU team theme. It was like, just get out. We had a lot of first-time players and up from fourth grade through high school, and just kind of getting kids out in this environment. We tried to do spacing. We didn't do like scrimmages or anything, just a lot of drills and things like that. And then we also do some personal training on the side now that this has got going. And we're trying to continue this next year, maybe turn it into a 501(c), kind of get more interest from a lot of kids who are just frustrated. And like, I have a kid, my daughter's in a junior in high school, and like everything's on hold. Like, she's a track girl, but like nothing's going on. So I think about all these kids who just have no outlet, and the AAU teams were going on, but now they're shut off. And it's just like, I don't think people understand how big a deal this is for these kids' mentality. And it may appear that, everything's fine and they can just get behind their computer, but like, there's some long-term stuff that's going to happen to these kids if they don't get out and get some of this. They just need activity and release and physical release for some of the stuff that's going on.
I completely agree. And that's awesome that you guys are doing that. So Pete, again, I want to thank you for coming on tonight, and it was awesome talking to you. And it's cool because, like I said, it's weird for me talking to guys who I, playing NBA Live, and then, I was 10 years old and talking to the guys now because
Can I add one story about that?
Yeah.
Because I had two experiences. One, a long time ago, I was walking to like a toy store, and this kid, this is back, I think I was like late 90s. I was still playing. The kid sticks his head around the aisle. He's like, "Oh my God, you're Pete Chilcutt." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You don't believe how good you are in this basketball game I play. It was called Tecmo basketball." And I'm like, "You never miss." I'm like, I never played myself in a game. I was like, yeah, I kind of laughed it off. Well, about 6 months ago, I got this letter, and I get I guess if you Google my name, my address pops up. So I get all this fan mail at home, and I got this package in the mail, and in the package was the 1992 Tecmo basketball game, the actual cartridge. And the kid's like, he goes, "You don't know how many times I schooled my friends and took their money by playing you in this game." And he goes, and I know it now, is that in 1991, a little known fact was that I was 2 for 2 from 3-point land. So I didn't miss. I didn't miss. So when my percentage that year is 1,000% or 100%. In the 1992 Tecmo game, if you take off the fatigue factor, like it put me in the game, I never missed because it was all based on your stats. So kids would put me in the game, and I would just shoot lights out. And so that was my claim to fame in the basketball, Tecmo basketball. So he sent me this game. He's like, "Can you please sign this game for me?" He goes, "I have so many great childhood memories of killing people with you in this game."
I love that.
And
That's
I was like,
story.
That is pretty awesome.
Oh my God. I never played Tecmo basketball. I played Tecmo Bowl.
Yeah,
me
too.
Yeah, I never played Tecmo basketball. I'm going to have to check that out then.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Version.
I know you're on plenty of our live NBA live games that we have, because we still play some of those games, and Chilcutt's a name that everybody knows. So it's
turn off the fatigue factor for my best stuff.
Oh, that's great. I never heard that story. I mean, I never knew that, I never played that game before. I can't believe I never even heard,
I never saw the game until I was like, literally, I think I took a screenshot. I have a screenshot of it because I was like, I never seen this game before. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, I got to look that up now. Yeah. That's great. Well, Pete, again, I appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time out to do this. And it's been an awesome conversation. And it was just fun to go over your career and like I said, you've had a pretty incredible career from Carolina on. And of course, the dream and playing with Rockets and your Italy story. I never knew about that. So that's definitely a story I think a lot of people will get something out of, when you feel like something might be over and your career might be over. And then from that to winning championship, it's pretty amazing.
Take advantage of those opportunities. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Pete, again, thank you for coming on, and have a good rest of the week, and we'll definitely catch up soon. So,
all right. Nice talking to you.
You too.
Okay.